Yeah, I'm here to talk about from side project to going indie. You might know me from RocketSim. It's a simulator tool. Who uses it here? Oh, that's good. All right. There are still a few potential users, so that's good. This is my blog where I write every week for, well, what is it, like 6 years now? So quite a few articles. And this is something new that you might not know if you're a RocketSim user, but this is new coming hopefully in a month, where we bring together all your local build data to show you insights, which MacBook is the fastest. So you can get an M3 for your whole team or an M4 for your whole team. That's the idea, obviously. But yeah, for today, I'm here to talk about clickers that don't work. Then you turn it off and you turn it on again. From side project to going indie. But what does going indie mean? Of course, there's the positive side of things. You have independence. You no longer have to work from 9 to 5, or you don't have those meeting days anymore. But there's also something that's like discipline, and there's more pressure. And suddenly you work for your own income, which can change a lot of things. And the key here is from side project. And there are quite a few talks that these are for tomorrow to excite you a little bit. But wouldn't it be amazing if you can apply those talks to your own side projects and make them work better? So I'm curious, and I try to see it. Who has a side project here? All right. Who has an unreleased side project? All right. Who dreams of going indie? Okay. Who doesn't dare to even dream about it? Okay, quite a few hands. So hopefully, after today's talk, you'll be more convinced that you can actually do it. And since the start of SwiftLee in 2015, I joined WeTransfer in 2017. That really ramped up my career. I watched Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, actually twice. I still had time with my friends, so we are sitting in a private cinema here, super amazing. I became a dad of 2. He's not afraid of heights, by the way. And I married my wife. We built our own house. Well, we kind of managed it. I still play golf. This is Josh from Fastlane, and he lost. Sorry, Josh, I just wanted to mention that. And I walk my dog 3 times a day for 30 minutes. And I'm not sharing this to brag you. I'm sharing this that I still managed to make my side projects successful. So there's basically no excuse. What we think is our potential, I believe, doesn't align with your actual potential. There's so much more you can do if you do the right thing. These are the topics I'll go over today, and these will all set you up for success, hopefully. And I want to start with mindset. Who here does bouldering? Right. We have quite some boulder gyms here in Amsterdam. And back in the days when I was working at WeTransfer, we would go out after work and we would do bouldering. And for me, it was quite boring because I was the type of guy who would sit at one route and I wouldn't escape it until I make it. Right? So I tried it 200 times until I was reaching the end. And the goal is to reach the final hold with 2 hands and you're, no strings attached and such. But my colleagues, they tried 3 times and then they just go to another route and try that one. Because every route has its own levels, right? Like the color green might be super easy and the color red might be super hard. And to me, the fact that I just keep pushing through was kind of like a similarity to side projects or to a personal app. Because if you think about it, you start a new project. It's super exciting, right? Like clean project, there's no bugs yet. You can use that new architecture that you know works. There's no Objective-C in it maybe, or anything like that. You start to build up the project. There's still excitement and joy, but eventually it becomes challenging, right? The results might not be like you expected, and then that new ID pops up. And then you start that new project instead, and you forget about that previous project, right? And that's the same with bouldering, right? Like you just go to another route and you can escape that challenge that you couldn't really manage to do. And to me, it's never a reason to quit just because it becomes challenging, right? Like failure is only temporary until you make it permanent. And that's the same with side projects. You need to push through. That's the first mindset I want you to know. And if you write an article, who here has a blog? So you will probably recognize this, all right? Let's see. So you write an article on day 1, and on day 2, you revisit that article, and you rewrite it a little bit because it's just not perfect anymore. On day 10, you start over because this is not good enough. I don't want to do it. And then eventually, you never publish that article. The way I do it, I start every Tuesday, and within 2 hours, I publish the article. Whether or not it's perfect, whether or not I think it's the perfect version of it. And then on day 10, I get feedback, which is actually great, right? Like I love receiving feedback, and I make mistakes. Like this week, I revisited my main actor article because apparently there were new things that didn't exist 2 years ago when I wrote it for the first time. I was happy, I just improved it. And on day 10, the next version of my article is much better than the first I had, but I already put it live and I already helped quite a few people with that first version of the article. So embrace imperfection, learn and improve, learn by shipping. Because that's eventually the way to success. You can sit there and waiting, not pushing out anything, but you won't receive that feedback for free in a way, right? Realistic expectations, that's quite challenging, especially if you look on social media these days. It makes it look like it's super easy to build a tool and put it out. Especially nowadays with AI, I've seen quite a few apps that popped up and directly made like thousands a month, but that's not the reality, right? So even a simple tool, you might not know what's behind it. Maybe they started working on it like 2 or 3 years ago, and that realistic expectation is something you need to have when you want to make a side project successful. This is another great example. I remember playing Angry Birds, and it was an amazing game, and it almost felt like an overnight success. The only example I can think of is Flappy Bird, which apparently was a Wednesday evening where he created that game and he made millions. But for this one, they don't tell you all the details, right? They were almost bankrupt, the company behind Angry Birds. And that to me shows like you need to try and find out what works and get out there, right? Like publish that first version of your side project, even though it's not perfect yet. Learn by shipping. And that first step is the hardest, but once it's out, you'll see the next update, it's much easier to do than at initial release. Now, I went indie and I had my personal financial goal. And the expectations we saw earlier might not align with that financial goal at all. Maybe you don't even need 10K monthly recurring revenue. Maybe 2,000 is enough for you, right? So you need to draw your own picture, your own journey, and focus on that. Don't get distracted by what's being told around you. Who knows these guys? I see one hand. Okay. Well, these are related to the cyclist team in England, and for 110 years they didn't win any Tour de France events. They didn't really, well, challenge even like other cyclists. And when this guy came on, they've changed everything, but only a little thing at the time. So 1% changes. So maybe the clothing was changed, or the time that the cyclists had to sleep, or what they eat. All those little improvements over time resulted in what you can now see, many successes. And this is an idea that comes out of the book Atomic Habits. I highly recommend reading it if you didn't read it yet. Even if you don't want to go indie, this book is amazing and it can change everything. And this is an example, right? Like 1% every day compounds over a year. And if you think about 1% improvement, it's much more achievable than changing everything you want to do. And this is a question I got a lot. I do so many things, but it's not that I built that in one day, right? Like I started in 2015, and all those little improvements over time that maybe only took 10 minutes a day resulted in what I have right now. In fact, this is RocketSim's revenue. And you can see for the first 2 years, it wasn't close to making me go indie, right? Like it was nothing. But eventually it started to ramp up. And when you start a new project, you put it live in the App Store. You're constantly refreshing App Store Connect. It's a bit slow, but finally you get results. And then maybe it's disappointing, right? Like you really hope see many downloads, and maybe you hope to get like 2K recurring revenue within a month or so, but eventually you realize it's not the truth, and that's the value of disappointment. And having that mindset, that expectation that growth will come over time, is such a game changer if you really want to make a success. All right, hopefully we now have the right, what I call indie mindset. Let's see how we can actually do something and plan ahead our days. I'm using GitHub. GitHub actually has a projects tool, which is super convenient if you're used to GitHub. Here you can see from my Q2, I did quite a lot of things, right? Sense of achievement. I felt great. I had a way to look back on what I did, which is already a small thing, but that has a major impact on your idea of what you can achieve. But I also see a to-do, which is still full of issues that I have to do, which is a great moment to reflect. Did I change my planning midway in the quarter, or did I think I could do it, but I didn't manage to do it, or can I prioritize my next quarter in a better way? These are all questions that can help you become more productive. And I go quite far, so I have several repositories, even a SwiftLee repository without code, but just a place to add issues. And you can bring them all together in such project. And here I slice per milestone, and I group them per status. And this way I can bring together all the several projects that I have and what I do, and create an overview of what I want to do for this quarter, for this month, even for this day. And that overview is crucial if you want to, achieve your goals. And making sense in your head might sometimes be really hard. You keep thinking, I shouldn't forget about this, I shouldn't forget about this, something like that, right? Like it happens to me all the time. So I quickly grab my phone and I write something down just to save that idea that you might have. And eventually I put it into a GitHub issue, even if it's something meta, unrelated to code. This was about the course that I created. I needed to have a microphone, so I started to research which microphone I should use. And I even do this for things that I already did. And that sounds stupid maybe. I open the ticket, I write something down, and I close it right away. But it does give me a better sense of achievement by the end of the quarter, because it's a complete overview of what you did. And the first step is often the hardest. If you want to achieve something big, you need to break it down into smaller steps. I had a conversation this morning, and the question I get asked, how do you do side projects when you're so busy already with a full-time job? Well, if you manage to break it down in small steps of 10 minutes, I'm sure you'll find 10 minutes a day, probably even, right? And if you know exactly what you want to do for that bigger step, that bigger goal, you can achieve it probably in a week, which is already an hour of work. And that altogether, that compounds once again, just like the 1% improvement that I showed earlier. So how to reach the goals that we set? This is a gym. You'll never find me in this gym because I have to go there myself. And I have to make sure that I'll actually go there. I just had dinner and I'll skip this evening, right? Like we all recognize that. But when I got myself a personal trainer, something changed. Every Friday, 9 a.m., my personal trainer is waiting for me to come. And that accountability made such a difference that now for 4 years, I'm constantly training every week and I never skip one. And that's it with accountability, right? Like it could be a trainer, it could be a friend that is a like-minded developer that also want to do side projects, but it could also be a personal deadline that's out there in the public. For such article, for example, if you announce on your Twitter, like next week I'll write about property wrappers, even though maybe nobody likes it or follows you, it's still out there, and you still have that idea of that public deadline, right? And that makes a whole difference, and that actually pushes you through, hopefully, to publish what you wanted to do. Could also be announcing the app that you're working on. And the people around you influence your growth. Hidde is here, shout out to Hidde. I love seeing updates for his Helm app lately, and that kind of like motivates me again, right, to get back to my side project. I also want to release a new update. Or when my friends reach a new milestone, I also want to reach a new milestone and share them, right? It just motivates you. And it's not jealousy, right? because you should really turn that into like passion, in extra motivation to push yourself, to push your projects into a next level. All right, mindset, goals, and planning. Productivity and focus is the next. And I want to start about work habits. And I believe some are here with their boss or with their manager. Maybe close their eyes and their ears, because this tip might not work for everyone. But I know quite a few indies have done this. And if you're great at your job, if you've worked for years in that project, you might know very well how to quickly solve things, and you might be done with your tasks for that sprint much quicker. And nobody would really notice if you spend like 15 minutes at the end of the day working on your own projects. I'm not accountable for this. But if you have those quick wins, you can do those at the end of the day, especially if you're working at home. That's another side tip. Either way, there's a difference between quick wins and deep work. And I also realized that quick wins are often more interesting to work for or pick up, because there's a result much quicker. But do try to do those only when you have a limited time available, and use the free days for the more deep work, right? So if you have 2 hours, pick that larger task, because that will have a higher impact eventually. Consistency. When I started writing a weekly article since 2017, and I think Paul is giving a talk tomorrow, he did the same recently and showed again, like, if you publish something every week, the consistency creates some kind of recognition for your audience. They know a new article will be there every week, and the growth that compounds there afterwards is insane. And it's the same for you. If you want to read a book, if you do it a little bit every day, this is crazy, right? Like, you read 100 books in 3 years. It seems incredible. And that's really the power of consistency. And perfectionism is something you need to avoid, in my opinion, right? Like, first validate the idea, the concept, before you really start optimizing it completely. And the designers out there will hate me for this one, but if you're not sure if a feature is actually working, there's no need to really optimize that whole perfect pixel perfect design, because you first want to know whether the users will even use it. And especially with side projects, where time is limited, you need to validate your concepts as quickly as possible. Regaining focus. I'm working at home constantly. And my oldest is 2.5 years old, and he often comes in my office, and I set myself the rule: if he wants if he wants attention, I want to be able to do that as much as possible. So I created this kind of like technique for myself to write down the context I'm in. And if I then get back into coding, I know exactly where I was left off. And that's such a big win to get you back up to speed when you're back ready for it. And stop while it's fun. So if you're in the middle of a challenge and it's hard to do and you quit, the next day you're not really interested to get back into that boring challenge. But if you're about to start working on a new Swift UI API where you're super excited but you only have like 10 minutes left for the day, maybe quit 10 minutes earlier because you're super excited the next day because you know it will be fun. And that's a great technique to get yourself going and to do more for your side projects. Context-aware learning. I'm walking the dog 3 times a day, 30 minutes. And not always, but often, when I'm, for example, optimizing my sales view for RocketSim, I listen to the Subclub podcast by Revenue Cat, and they have all kinds of episodes on how you can increase conversions and those kind of things. I pick an episode and I listen to it while I walk the dog, and that puts me back into the context, and it creates kind of like a win-win when you're already working on something similar. Blinkist is great for reading books real quickly. It's like a summarized version of the book as an audiobook, basically like a podcast. Yeah, it could work out well if you don't like reading. And this is my slogan, right? If I'm a better version of myself tomorrow, then eventually I will be much smarter next year, and so on and so on. And these could be little things that you do every day. And by doing this, you also set yourself up for success or for that lucky moment. Imagine that the company you always wanted to work for suddenly opens up a position, but it requires Swift UI knowledge. And you've been lazy over the past few years, so you didn't invest any time into how Swift UI works. That means you're not ready for that moment, that potentially lucky moment. And that's what I mean about preparing yourself, right? So do invest in your knowledge and in your learnings. And some might think Antoine is only working. Hopefully you don't, but yeah, it don't always work, right? Planning is actually key here. I plan ahead my day, and oftentimes I'm done much quicker than I expected to be for the day, and then I quit. I don't pick up another task, right? You want to make sure that you don't overwork. Don't give up too quickly. I said it before, but there is a certain challenge that you can't avoid, and there's techniques to get done with it in a way. And I use a rubber dog, and with that I mean I just I go for a walk, and somehow he always managed to get me the input that I need, and I get back to my computer, and suddenly I know how to solve an issue. And there's also something called sleep learning. I got that confirmed by somebody at SwiftLee. So if you think about it before you go sleeping, your brain starts to continue processing the ID, what you did, and the next day, when you come back to it, it's oftentimes that you have the right processing done to solve something more quicker. So time boxing works pretty well for these cases. So think about the books, out of the books. If you try to fix a bug and you get stuck, especially with side projects, write a bit more logging, right? If you have a user that reached out to you, write a bit more logging, ask that user to update your app, send another diagnostics report which contains the logs, more about that later, and then revisit at that point, right? Like don't spend like 2 or 3 valuable hours just on fixing a bug if you don't have enough context yet. Same with a feature. If you get stuck, step back, invest in learning, watch the WWDC video, and get back to it, right? Like, make the most out of the time that you have available. And you can also think about this when it's about marketing, right? Like, we're developers oftentimes a little less good at marketing. So once again, invest in learning and apply that eventually. I read a lot of articles on how to do newsletter promotions or drip campaigns, and I try to apply that right away. I'm not reinventing the wheel, so to say. And if you do what you like, it's much easier to push through as well. It's very tempting to build all kinds of AI tools nowadays because it's easy money, it seems. But if it's not what you truly like and it becomes challenging, it will be really tough to push through. So try to stay close to what you do, right? Like if you like a certain sport, try to see if you can build an app that aligns to sports because you already have an audience maybe as well, right? It makes things so much easier. Automation, that's another thing I do a lot because eventually this will result in so much more time available. It's almost like a flywheel effect, right? Like every time you do an automation, it will result in more time, which you can use to build another automation, which results in more time, and so on and so on. And every time that you create more time, you can build a new feature or level yourself up. And I do this with certain tools. This is an internal tool I use for my newsletter, SwiftLee Weekly, where I have Swift evolution changes. And before this tool, I had to manually go to the PRs, find out which proposal markdown files changed status, get that status. You can already tell, like from explaining it, it's already takes more time than just pressing that button and post it to GoodBits, which I used for my newsletter back then. But as well with diagnostics reports, I mentioned that earlier. This is an open source project that I created back when I was still working at WeTransfer. And what it does, it answers the common questions like, which app version are you using? Which macOS version are you on? Did you update to the latest version of the app? But it also contains, and that you can see in the bottom, session logs, and these contain all the logs from your app. Well, you can opt in for that, but for me, for RocketSim, I can directly see what happened to the user. And oftentimes, I only need one email with that diagnostics report to give the answer to the user what's going on. This is a great promotion for In Your Face, a meeting app. I will tell him to not do that when Keynote is open. That's a bug report. Great app, by the way. I met him in Bologna, and I'm using it for a few weeks, and it helps me to, if I have a meeting, be in time. Great marketing hack. Damn. For my next talk. So, diagnostics report, go check that out. AI, obviously, I'll keep it short on this one. You can give a separate talk on AI, but do embrace AI in your workflow. It can really speed up your development. Development practices, right? Let's get into action. And the idea you need to have is like, how can I speed up my development and make the most out of my time? Because once again, we're talking about side projects next to your full-time job. So the time that you have available needs to be used as valuable as possible. What I like to do is to create a personal SDK. I only have 2 apps. I also have a stocks app, not as known as RocketSim for you probably, but I do reuse components, which allows me to maintain it once. And that's a great benefit. So if you start a new project, even if it doesn't become successful, but you've set it up with packages, and we saw a great talk about this earlier, you make it easier for yourself to start a new app with the code that you've already written, right? So this is a great tip for when you're starting a new project soon. So I need a new clicker as well. All right. And this is for RocketSim. The features that you might know are all separate packages, and they even come with their own example project, which allows me to more quickly get into an isolated environment and build faster. But another benefit of it is that it feels like a new project. So I start a new Xcode project. It's a new package. I'm in a new environment. It builds fast. You know, it satisfies. So if you're really tempting to start a new project, see if you can start a new project that adds to your existing project. Reusability, and it compiles faster and so on. We all know these benefits. And tests. You know, this is a debate that you always have. Well, I think tests will actually save you time. And maybe you don't need to write tests for everything, but if it's some kind of like business logic, it's often faster to write a test and validate the outcome than having to launch your app, get into that specific view, and see if all the scenarios are correct. Let alone if something is not working as expected and you need to redo that multiple times. That test is much faster, but it will also save you from, you know, getting bugs in the future ahead. I also do this for bug reports, by the way. I like to write a test for a bug to reproduce it and then solve it, which kind of prevents yourself from running into the bug again in the future. Now, deciding what to build is something interesting too. I have this open source project that I created together with Hidde and with Jody. And what it allows you to do is to list the features that you plan on building and let your users vote on it. And it's not that I picked the one that has the most votes, because oftentimes it's too difficult to build. But I look at the feasibility. So in this case, the one at the bottom was much easier for me to build because I already had a proof of concept for it. So it was a no-brainer to pick that one first because it's the right balance between the features that I planned on building. And you could look at this chart in a way, right? Like you have the quick wins and the deep work, the bigger features. And you want to ensure that you're in that top row and not underneath, because if you spend a lot of time to something you think is cool to build, but if your users don't want it, it's kind of wasted time, right? So you need to be aware of this, and you could almost place those features on this chart, if you will. So this is RocketSim, the active trials, and I didn't do any promotion points, but you can guess where a new feature was launched, right? And I did that based on the roadmap view that I showed you earlier. Obviously, it was here. This was last June, where I introduced the network traffic monitoring, so you could see all the requests that go out of the simulator. Marketing and audience growth. So I like to think about win-win opportunities, right? If I learn about something, I'm pretty likely going to write about it next week. And the same happened with main actors. I learned about it at Bologna, at Pragma conference, so not much later, I wrote an article about it. And I reused that content. You're already in that context, so it's a great win. And I wrote the article much quicker than if I would have to dive into a new topic and then write an article about it. And I reuse my content. So obviously, when I released the network traffic monitoring for RocketSim, I wrote an article about it. Then on my Twitter, I pinned a tweet which shows the network traffic monitoring as well. So once again, reusing it on social media. And I also use the same visuals in the Mac App Store, which creates like a seamless experience for those that start the journey on the article or maybe on Twitter. They recognize the images, the visuals, and it increases the potential of actually installing the app because they recognize what they've seen before. And your audience looks for value, but one thing happened to me when I was speaking in Argentina last year. The speakers actually were afraid to talk with me because they thought he's so knowledgeable and he's so serious on social media. He's probably really a scary guy to talk to. This is also my moment to say, like, I'm not. So please approach me later when we drink a coffee. I'm really open, and that's why I'm here. I want to talk with you. And I changed my profile as well after that. So you see a lot more Bernese mountain dogs and chickens, and there's my mother-in-law. Well, you probably get to know me a little bit better, but it makes it more personal, right? And also, post a lot of content if you can. You can use tools to do that automatically, because only 2% of your followers will see your post. So you're not annoying anyone if you repost something or republish it a month later, because most likely they don't even notice. But it does result in much more growth. And all those funnels, you can lead them into an email list, because that's a way to retain your users, and that's a way to create another upsell opportunity for your products, and eventually resulting in more growth and more revenue. And marketing is like fishing. My audience is mostly developers, and I have my blog targeting developers and so on and so on. But if I post something on TikTok, I'm not sure how many developers I will reach there, right? But maybe your app is like a recipe app, and you can do something with a cooking video and post that on TikTok and on Instagram. Maybe that works, but yeah, do know where your audience is and spend time there. And great marketing only works if your product is ready for it, right? You can spend a lot of money on paid acquisition, but if your onboarding sucks, then it probably isn't as effective as it could have been. So what I did before I did paid acquisition with RocketSim, I optimized my onboarding funnel. And I'm using Amplitude here, and I have each step of my onboarding, and I can basically see the drop-off per step and optimize accordingly. And you can see that one changed in the flow, which was kind of like a feature explanation view. I first used a YouTube video, which quickly became outdated, and then I used like real native views to explain each feature individually, which explained it much better, and that resulted in much more users going through the funnel. And the final actually is how many did a successful purchase, and that went up even more than how many users relatively passed through the funnel. And your funnel doesn't start in your app, right? Like your Mac App Store page is also important, and your promotion before that too. And yesterday actually there was a new App Store Connect app update, and there's also now the opportunity to create custom product pages with a custom deep link. And that one is crucial, because if you do a promotion on Twitter, for example, and you push them through a custom product page with network traffic monitoring, and then you deep link into the app, telling your app like this user came from the marketing network traffic monitoring key, kind of, then you can also receive that user with more copy and content and visuals based on that same promotional marketing assets, and that will increase your conversions. And you have many funnels that can go into that starting funnel, right? And if every funnel that you create brings in one user a day, that's already a lot of growth. So it's really about setting that up, making it work for you, use the tools that you can use, and eventually benefit from the growth that it brings. You can also benefit from multiple niche products. This is an example I often like to give. Say you have a Photos app and a developer tool app. They're different apps with different audiences, meaning that you need to build up an audience twice and you need to do everything twice. That's not super efficient, especially for side projects. So it's much better to see if you can build an app or multiple apps for multiple products targeting the same audience. The past 2 weeks I spent time optimizing my newsletter, but it didn't hurt RocketSim, because if my newsletter performs better, I will get more developers in, and if I get more developers in, I'll likely convert more developers into RocketSim as well, right? So that all compounds, and your time is always well spent. Because every product can promote each other. It's as simple as that. And I also like Jordi Bruin. He spoke about this in my new podcast in the first episode, where many free apps, he gives them away for free, and you might think like that is stupid, like that's a lose of money. But eventually he built up like an email list of like 300,000 emails or something via Gumroad. And if he now pushes out a paid app every now and then, if only 1% buys his app for like $10, well, you can do the math. So if you have a large app, maybe consider grabbing one feature out of it, put that out as a free version, because that will bring in users with the same interest. And if you then convert them promote your paid app, your large app, you'll likely gain more users. And they get it for free, right? So they also accept a bit more promotion in those cases. So relationships are important too. So there's people sitting next to you you might not know later with a coffee. See if you can talk with them, right? I wouldn't be surprised if there's a hidden opportunity behind that, and you will be able to potentially get like a new job or find somebody to work together with. Paul and Hille got to know each other actually at Do iOS, I believe, and they're now building the App Store Connect app, the native application, right? So it can all start with just a simple conversation. And it could be, I think we all have those friends, right? Like, they might be super busy and you're constantly pushing to grab a coffee together while you don't get anything back. Well, these things happen, but it doesn't mean that eventually that relationship will pay itself back and result in a great job opportunity or anything like that. So win-win opportunities. I told it before, I launched a new podcast, and my reach compounds with the audience that I have. Yesterday I was sitting down with Tim Condon and Paul, who are both giving a talk tomorrow. Go check it out. The content of the podcast is all about how you can go indie, how they went indie, what challenges did they face, and what worked out for them. So it could be a great inspiration if you're considering making your side projects more successful. So financial strategies. Your goal is to go indie, so you need to build up a recurring revenue. So these metrics, you need to get yourself familiar with those if you don't know them yet. I optimized a lot for my paywall. And this is not the perfect paywall, not at all, but it works for me, for my product. I tested it out with A/B tests and such, but it does show how far you can go with little optimizations and eventually gain more conversions. Define your offering with recurring revenue in mind. I've had many discussions about doing a lifetime yes or no, or complaints that my recurring subscription model is annoying for a developer tool. You lose some, right? Like some don't like it, and it's getting better nowadays. Subscriptions are more accepted. But it is the reason that I'm standing here as an indie developer today, because I've built up a recurring income which I can rely on. I know like next month I will gain a certain amount of money that will pay the bills. So that is my vision on turning side projects financially into a success. But you need to balance value with price, right? A new feature might justify a price increase, but if you're solely increasing the price just because you gain more users, that's probably not a good reason. And I also dislike, existing users. I don't want to raise their price. They show trust. This is a great tip if you buy RocketSim today and I change my price next week. You won't get that price increase, right? Like you need to think carefully about the users that show trust in your app and don't just go crazy with your pricing. And the benefit of having a full-time job is that you can use the money that you earn to increase growth for your side project. You don't need it yet. So I recommend putting that money that you earn into a separate bank account and reuse it, do paid acquisition or buy tools or, see if you can gain more visibility and see if you can create relationships out of that. Go to a conference that might have your audience and talk with people that can push you to the next level. And one thing I did, I think 2 years ago, I started working 1 day a week. And that's actually when my revenue really started to ramp up. And it's solely because I had one full-time day where I can focus on more in-depth work. And I could build like larger features. And those larger features had a higher impact on my growth, right? So Tim Condon did the same. When he started doing more paper work 1 day a week, he could clearly see the growth, and eventually it makes the step much easier, right? Because you already have a lot of income, so the risks of going indie is much lower. So this could be a perfect in-between step. You can also reduce risk by diversifying revenue. I have all kinds of products that alone bring in quite some revenue. So if some Apple company builds some kind of RocketSim, then I still have my SwiftLee newsletter and so on. You need to prepare yourself for that, basically. So eventually, hopefully, you can make the leap and you can go indie. I do want to let you know, like, it's fine to eventually go back to a job, right? That's a great securance. We're in tech. I know the job market is a bit tougher these days, But Sean Allen is a great example. He went indie for 5 years or so, and he now went back into a company because he just missed the teams. Nothing is set in stone when you go indie, right? It's not permanent. And remember your core values. If things become tough, see if you can retain that discipline. And like if you do it to spend more time with your family, that can push you through difficult times. So key takeaways. You'll be wearing a lot of hats. You can actually use your full-time job today to see if you can sit down with the marketing people or people that do sales and see if you can learn from their experiences and prepare yourself for when you take the leap and you actually need that experience to do your own marketing and such. The path to success won't be easy. It's not an easy route, but step by step, eventually the growth will come. I'm sure. If you're trusting in yourself, I'm sure you will make it. And to make you succeed, a lot of my slides from today are from my course. It's online. I go in much more depth. You can potentially use that for your indie journey. And I want to close off with believe in yourself. Your potential is much higher than you might think, and hopefully that brings you all to becoming an indie developer. So thanks.